Welcome back, everybody, to the Below Average Joes present Verbal Sparring, the show where me and Dominic go tit for tat, eye for an eye, all those sayings in between. We take on the most hotly debated questions in the world of MMA today. And ultimately, we're going to agree on some. We may disagree on others.
Mm,
It may get a little feisty, but
mm.
all I know is I couldn't be happier to do this episode with anybody else. Noah Baker. I am, of course, just half of the below average Joes. I'm just one, as we always say in our outro. Everybody's a below average Joe in this community, baby.
Yes.
But the other guy, my left hand, my go to, that is Dominic Salee. Dominic, I want to start. I wouldn't give you the floor, but I must say I apologize to any of our listeners or anybody watching. The last episode we did, our recap of the previous weekend, my laptop took a complete shit on me right before starting recording, which is kind of probably a blessing in disguise. It's not been a smooth run with that laptop. I had it for less than 2 years, and now it's broken. If that tells you anything, um, and we had a ton of just issues with connectivity, and it seemed like no matter what I did to make my internet connection stronger, it just wasn't working. So hopefully this new laptop will do us better. But because of that, you can only make it sound so good on a phone. It was pretty clear to me that it was not of the same quality, but just had to get that out of the way. Just apologies to everyone. If you're new here, promise, normally that's not how I sound. Now, Dominic, how are you doing? How's the week been? How's the family been?
Oh, Noah, you're always just the best at asking me about life, and I've tried to be better, as good as you, but it's hard to
Mhm.
follow in those footsteps. But life's good, family's good. It's been a good week. The weather is still also beautiful, Noah. Got some landscaping work done throughout the week for Grandpa and some others, so that was fun. Got some sun. Actually, some would say a little bit too much sun, especially Grandma. You know, Grandma, she's not big on the sun, Noah. She had got on me a time or two. Yeah, I heard it, but life's good, and I'm happy to be back. We're doing a verbal sparring. Feels like forever, but with our kind of monthly calendar, the way we do our other episodes outside of the previews and recaps, it's time for another verbal, and I've been waiting for it. I have a blast when we do these. I love these questions that Noah brings to the table. It's going to be fun. How are you? How's life? Are you just so happy to have a computer that, knock on wood, for recording number one, seems to be going oh so fine for you?
Yeah, so far so good. It was a tough week last week with technology. That might be something. Maybe I'll save that for closing statements. But just a series of misfortunate events, basically, or unfortunate events. I don't know. It was a bad week for technology, and therefore, we live in such a technological world, Dominic.
Yeah, yeah,
This ain't the '80s.
yeah.
These ain't Stranger Things times. We have to depend on this shit to
Mm,
just do life. And,
yeah.
it just life wasn't happening last week. But I'm glad to hear that you've been out there getting some sun, getting some work done. I'm ready to get some sun. I'm tired of being so pasty all the time. I'll be spending a week in PCB where I inevitably
Mm.
will be all gung ho about the beach. And then after my first day out there, I will be too burnt to go back out there the rest of the week. Um, no surprise about Mamaw.
Yeah.
Outside of me, nobody knows how to satisfy her. But Dominic,
That's
I
that's
think the
true.
only way that you would be able to is if you were wearing what you wore now outside. So you are wearing a hoodie right now,
Yeah.
which kind of strange. It is probably 80 degrees outside. So I think that you must be trying to send a message to your folks about the weather in that basement, huh?
Yeah, it's a little nippy down here. I had the t-shirt on. I said, nope, can't do it. We're sitting down to record. I got to be comfy cozy for Noah, and that's what I'm doing. Comfy cozy vibes all the way.
There we go. There we go. So yeah, we are here to do verbal sparring once again. I already kind of explained what the concept is, but we have 8 questions to go over here today. I will ask each one. I'll give Dominic the floor for his thoughts on the question, then I'll rebuttal, And I mean, a lot of times me and Dominic are pretty similar people. So, contrary to what the title of this series would tell you, there's not a ton. I mean, we have our disagreements, but overall, I mean, we tend to agree a little bit. We kind of build off of each other's
Hmm.
opinion more so than tear each other down. So, but anyways, question number one, Dominic, are you ready to go?
I'm so ready. I'm so
All
ready.
right. So we actually start, Dominic, with two viewer submitted questions. How about that?
Ooh, love that.
It has been a while, but I want to give a shout out to this individual that messaged us on Instagram. Dominic, I, and I'm going to apologize to him. He did a lot of apologizing to me and the
Mm,
message, or to us, for typing the message, which again I think it was just a language barrier. But I'm going to apologize to him because I am not going to be able to pronounce his full name. It's not going to happen because I think it would come off super disrespectful if I even tried. But I will at least say the first name,
yeah.
Uger. I think it's
Okay.
Uger.
Okay.
So Uger writes in two different questions, but the first one, Dominic, is about the man who just retired a few months ago, Fedor Emelianenko, considered perhaps the best fighter to never step foot inside of the UFC octagon, and really just one of the best all-around MMA fighters of all time. There was a time, though, Dominic, where the rumors were swirling, where the talks were heavy for Fedor to enter the UFC and have a super fight with the then UFC heavyweight champion Brock Lesnar. So that should kind of put you in the timetable. We're talking here 2009, 2010, UFC 100 time frame where the UFC really took that second boom after the tough boom of a few years prior. So, Dominic, the question is, would Fedor have been UFC champion if he had come to the promotion between 2009 to 2010? Your thoughts?
Yeah, this is a good one because this is around that time frame too where little Dom was entering junior high Dom and getting a little bit more interest, day by day in the UFC. Obviously not a hardcore still at that age and time, but especially when Brock came over being a WWE kid, as me and Noah like to say on this show, it was very interesting and it had my attention a lot more than even prior years. And it just felt like the sport was becoming more popular. Now, of course, at that time, I didn't really know who Fedor was or anybody that wasn't in the UFC, but hindsight now being where I am and all of the fights and stuff that we've watched over the years, this is a great question. And I'd like to think, because especially during this time is when Fedor was really on a reign of terror. I know 2010 and 11 wasn't the greatest for him, but he was still very much so one of the best heavyweights in the world at this time. I'm going to have to say yes. No, I think he could have been the UFC champion, the UFC heavyweight champion during this time frame. I mean, you look at this win streak that he was on before the year 2010, and even then, he lost to Fabricio Verdum. He lost to Antonio Silva, Dan Henderson. Like these are still very much top of the line guys during that time frame. Then you look at some of the fighters that were in the UFC at that time. Of course, a fight with Brock Lesnar could have been absolutely massive. You look at the Frank Mears, the Shane Carwins, the Heath Herrings of the world. I think Fedor and that younger Fedor, especially his skill set, would have matched up pretty well, made for some pretty fun fights. And I'd like to think, I don't know how long he would have been the champ, but I like to think he had that gold belt around his waist if he was in the UFC now.
Dominic, your answer disappoints me a little bit. It
Really?
disappoints me a little bit because not because you said that he's going to be champion,
Oh,
but you are avoiding there is a hidden second part to this question.
oh.
I mean, if you're saying you believe he's going to be champion at that time, you got to say who's he match up well against with the crop of heavyweights at that time? Who do you predict him to beat when you look at who they were in 2009 to 2010? I mean, look at the champion Brock Lesnar. How do you think he matches up with him? How do you think he matches up with JDS, Cain Velasquez? All these guys that were coming through. Shane Carwin, like you said. I'll let you give it a second shot here.
No, I think a lot of those names I mentioned and a couple that I didn't with JDS and Kane are all relatively good matchups still. I don't think he gets, maybe Kane's probably the toughest. I think Kane would be the
Yeah,
hardest matchup for Fedor, but Kane was the hardest matchup for a lot of people during that
yeah.
time. But like, I think he could beat Brock potentially. I know Brock's so big and so strong with the wrestling, but I think Fedor could win that. I think he can beat a Frank Mir, a Shane Carwin, a Heath Herring. I mean, if Brock can beat these guys, I'd like to think arguably the greatest heavyweight of all time, Fedor Emelianenko in his prime, could have also beat these guys. And he had beaten Tim Sylvia's and Arlovsky's, Mark Hunt's going into this time frame as well. I think there's only one really hard matchup that I maybe could say he would lose and like be confident in saying that, and it's probably a Cain Velasquez.
Yeah, no, that's a good answer, Dominic. I mean, and plus when you mentioned Kane, Kane, as good as he was in that time frame, he was still probably like a year or two away. I forget what year he was. I think it was 2011 when he became champion. So, you know, Fedor, technically, if he were to beat Brock, he could have had a little bit of a run as a heavyweight champion before ultimately, as he took that dip with that first 3-fight losing streak, he probably would have been facing someone like Kane or JDS or hell, even like a Shane Carwin's an interesting fight. You know, when I look at this, Dominic, it's a tough one because if you kind of have to consider 2009 to 2010. That's 2 years, right?
Hmm.
And what's interesting about that is those years are where you see the biggest drastic difference and the first drastic, I guess, dip in Fedor's performances. In 2009, Dominic, he knocks out Andrei Arlovsky in 3 minutes at Affliction, the second Affliction event. It would be the last Affliction event. Remember when Affliction made those really hideous looking clothes that you see at Walmart?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah. So then he followed that up with the Strikeforce knockout, second round knockout of Brett Rogers. Now, Dominic, Brett Rogers might not be a name you might not be that familiar with. Brett Rogers was considered a big deal at the time, kind of a big prospect. His career would flame out in more ways than one. Unfortunately, he has not had quite a great life after this, but at that time, he was looked at as the real deal. Fedor shut the hype train down. But then obviously after that, Dominic, that 3-fight losing streak, like, yes, the names you mentioned, Fabricio Verdum kind of just caught him in a sub. It happened literally, I think, less than a minute. It was just over a minute into the fight. Like, he just got caught in an armbar. Like, that was it. Just all she wrote.
Hmm.
Bigfoot Silva was more of a beating. That was a Grand Prix fight. So I remember that was when Bigfoot Silva was really at his best in MMA. The Dan Henderson one's a bit more shocking when you think about it, Dominic, because as good as Dan Henderson was, you're talking about a natural
Yeah,
185er
the size.
putting a
Yeah.
beat down on a heavyweight in Fedor Emelianenko. So it was clearly a dip at this time. So it's like a lot of it kind of depends on when does Fedor get into the UFC? Is it more closer to the early 2009? Then I think he holds up pretty well against Brock Lesnar, as tough and as big and strong as he was and athletic and had great wrestling, of course. He was very raw and green in a lot of other areas of MMA, and Fedor being just so well rounded and had fought the who's who,
Hmm.
Dominic. Don't let the UFC tell you different. There was a time when Pride had the premier heavyweights across the board.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, that was the time when my guy Andrei Arlovsky was UFC heavyweight champion. But ultimately, it's a tough. I mean, he's been bred for that moment through that time, through that run. You've mentioned the run he was on. I think I counted it while you were talking. I want to say it was a 28 fight unbeaten streak. There's one no contest in there against Nogueira, but I want to say it was. I think it said 20. I think I counted 28 fights in a row. Basically, if you take the no contest out, that's 27 wins in a row. But then he loses 3 straight.
Yeah.
That's what makes it so crazy. It's just the it's like off a cliff, And obviously,
Mm.
he still ended up with like another decade of fights where
Yeah.
he was pretty damn good, but it was just not the same. Long-winded answer here. I know I'm kind of going on a little long. I think Dominic at this time I'm gonna meet in the middle because I don't want to say well he came in early 2009 and I don't want to say he came in at the end of 2010. So I'm gonna say he
Mm.
comes in like right at the end of 2009, early 2010, debuts against Brock Lesnar, and I'm gonna say at that time Brock Lesnar beats him.
Mm. Imagine a fight of that magnitude then.
Man, that hurts me to say too because think a lot of people won't like that answer. Brock Lesnar he's always been kind of that weird. He has a weird place in UFC history.
Mhm.
Some can look at him as almost like a Mount Rushmore type figure, and some would look at him as like the antithesis of what they love about MMA. Like
Yeah.
a guy who came in, only had a couple fights and gets a title shot because of his name elsewhere, all that.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think overall, though, I'm going to say that if it happened around beginning of 2010, Brock beats him. And ultimately, though, Dom, I do think it depends, like Frank Mir, for example. Interesting matchup because I think Fedor could hurt him pretty bad on the feet. But
Yeah.
Fabricio was able to sneak in that submission very quickly against him. Frank Mir could do the same thing. He did it against Tim Sylvia to win the title. Ultimately, I would say in 2010, his toughest threats would be Brock and probably Frank Mir. I think
Mm.
he handles Nogueira just like he did in Pride. Nogueira a little bit older by that point. And then after him, I mean, JDS and Kane were maybe a little bit too soon to be
Yeah. Up
joining that
there.
group.
Yeah.
Shane Carwin's an interesting fight, but I think Shane would probably give him a tough first round, but then for Fedor's cardio would probably will him to a victory still.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think it's pretty much everybody that I'm thinking of in there. But then obviously once JDS and Kane were like ready to fight for a title, I don't know if I see either him beating either of them at that point on their rise.
Yeah, both of them on their rise seemed so those two felt like the next evolution at that point of like heavyweights,
Yeah.
like two very well-rounded guys, but very strong suited as well, like JDS with his boxing, Kane with his wrestling, but they were just really good, good cardio. They were very much that like that next evolution after the Frank Mears, the Coutures, the Brocks, the Carwins. It was those two that led that charge. And at that point, Fedor's best days, I think, would have been behind him to beat those two studs at that time. But man, Noah, like, do you ever still wish? And obviously we were so young then, it wouldn't have been as monumental. But of course, looking back now, had the UFC gotten that done, gotten Fedor to fight Brock, that's a massive, massive event. Or do you think it wouldn't have been so massive because of the sport still being relatively newer? Yeah, Brock's going to pull eyes, but who's this Fedor guy? You know what I mean? Like to those casual fan base,
Mhm.
especially during this time, which is it's so much smaller of a fan base then, it's so much less global of a fan base. Where do you fall on that spectrum of how big that fight would have been at that time?
I think it would rival the numbers UFC 100 brought in, which
You think
UFC
so?
100 was the first event to pass a million pay-per-view buys.
Mm-hmm.
I think it would be up there for sure. And I think it's because Dominic, you would get both crowds.
The
Brock
pride.
Lesnar brings in the casual fans,
Yeah.
and then the hardcore fans come for Fedor, wanting to see him kick Brock Lesnar's ass. I think it's a
Mm,
perfect storm where I think that fight sells really well. I think it was a huge event. But
mm,
truthfully, Dominic, I don't look back on it and go, I mean, obviously, this is before my time, right? So I'm
yeah.
kind of like, whatever. But also, I kind of think it's cool that like someone like Fedor, who you can make a debate for being the best MMA fighter of all time, and he never fought in the UFC.
Ah, yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think
That's a
that's
great
kind of
point.
cool. I think it's
Yeah.
kind of cool because that's not something that, at least in today's current landscape, it's hard to imagine that that could ever happen again.
Mm,
But obviously, you see Francis Ngannou with his headlines. You've seen what Demetrius Johnson's been able to do for one. And, I kind of like that. I like that a guy can, carve his own path
mm.
because as much as I love the UFC, it's important to have that healthy competition elsewhere. I want to see some of these other promotions thrive. And Fedor's kind of that almost like mythic figure for these guys to try to follow in the path of.
Hell yeah, baby. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
what I'm talking
Fucking
about.
fucking come on, bro. Come on,
Phew,
bro.
yeah. Yeah.
Question number 2. God, man, we really went for that question. I'm actually a little surprised. Shout out to you, man. That guy was sending some
Uh,
heat.
Yeah.
And it continues here because this
It
is
was
the
a
second
long ass
question.
message.
Yeah, I definitely, this is not word for word what the question was. I definitely just cleaned it up just so we could put it on the, on the
Yeah.
screen and everything. This one involves Brock Lesnar, Dominic. So just
Mhm.
asking about 2010 heavyweights. That's what Ugur had on the mind. He said, how much better would Brock Lesnar have been if he had started training and competing in MMA instead of going to the WWE? I mean, he kind of went on, or even before that, was saying, directly after his collegiate wrestling career at Minnesota, if he had started training MMA, how far could he have taken it, Dominic? Do you think, considering what Brock would have gained in the actual training of becoming a mixed martial artist, an all around fighter, do you think that gain versus the loss in name value he'd have from never competing in WWE, like, do you think he gets as far as he did with the path he took?
I think, yeah, okay. I'm actually glad you said that.
I know
This
I kind of wish I hadn't because I wanted to see
No,
where
but
your
I
brain
think
went
that's
first.
important though. You know what I mean? Like, because
No, it is.
you look at this question on the surface, and it seems like it's easy to say yes. Like he would have been a better fighter for
Mm.
sure. Like because he went into the WWE and became a champion. He was what 23, 24.
Well, he was the
He,
youngest
at
WWE
one
champion of
point,
all time.
yes,
I think he was 22 because I think Randy Orton was like, or maybe he was 23 and Randy Orton was 22. Randy
yeah.
Orton beat his record. I know that.
Yes. So, I mean, if that, and say what you want about the WWE, but you have to be a freak athlete regardless to be successful there. And that's what he was. So imagine right out of college as a national champion wrestler, he goes straight to an MMA gym. And at the time, obviously, again, the sport much smaller, but still, the point remains the same. He would have been really being molded into a complete fighter, and not because he had power, obviously, in hands, little vibration in the ear.
Sorry.
He had the power and he had amazing grappling. Imagine if he had all those polishments. Maybe he doesn't get, heel hooked by Frank Mir in their first fight and stuff like that. So as a fighter, he could have became incredible and been a champion longer than what he was. And he defended the belt 2 times, and you don't see a lot of title defenses at heavyweight. He could have even been maybe that evolution, if you will, along with Kane and JDS, but he was not. But the second half of that part is what Noah brought up. Name value, nowhere near the same. A million pay-per-views at UFC 100, not happening. Not without WWE Brock Lesnar and that guy that dabbled into the NFL and just had eyes on him from the time he got out of college until he entered into the UFC. None of that is there. So the question is just how much better would he have been? He would have been astronomically better as a fighter and would have been a very, very dangerous fighter compared to what he already was. But that same aura and the fanfare and the eyeballs is not there whatsoever.
Sorry, I was listening, but I'm also like trying to get that shit to not vibrate anymore. I reset my phone settings, everybody. Just another thing. Long story. We'll get
It's all
to it at
closing
closing
statements.
statements. Um, yeah, so I guess you're right. I'm glad I did kind of give you that caveat
Yeah.
there at the
Yeah.
beginning because you really took that somewhere. Um, ultimately, Dominic, I guess you weigh the pros and cons of this question, right? Like, does he get to as big as he was when he became UFC heavyweight champion? And when I say that, Dominic, I really don't even mean like I think it's a given that there is a less than 1% chance he's ever, like you said, selling a million pay-per-views. Like, I don't think that's happening at all
Yeah.
if he
Yeah.
takes this path. What I mean by as big, I guess I mean, does he reach that same peak in the sport? Does he still become a UFC heavyweight champion? And I think it's a pretty easy answer. I think it's yes. I think he
Oh,
pretty
hell yeah.
easily does. I mean, you look at that time period, which would have been late 90s, early 2000s. Don't get me wrong. I mean, the UFC, the MMA athlete, I should say, not UFC athlete, but the MMA athlete was definitely starting to develop. And there was some beast from the beginning. I mean, once you had guys like Mark Coleman and
Oh, yeah.
Dan Severn coming in and a lot Don Fry, these guys and Kevin Randleman. I mean, talk
Hmm.
about a freaking
Yes.
nature.
Yeah.
Randy Couture, of course, in his early days. Like, and then you even get to the more striking discipline of like a Pedro Hizzo And then, guys like Josh Barnett starting to come in. Like those are the kind of guys who are making an impact when Brock would have been ready to, probably go pro and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, on the pride side, let's not forget, I'm mentioning a lot of UFC heavyweights. Meanwhile, you got Fedor, you got Nogueira, you got hell Bob Sapp, who I know is not technically a heavyweight, but he was down for a fight every now and then.
Hmm.
Um, and many more. It's so. Do I think he becomes a UFC heavyweight champion? Yeah, I think he does it kind of with ease. To be honest with you, like I don't know who has the mixture of, for one, wrestling was dominant in the UFC or just in MMA in general during the time that Brock would have been probably ready to take on some pro bouts. It obviously did not take you as many pro bouts to really leave an impact and find yourself at the pinnacle of the sport. There
Yeah.
wasn't a lot of money in it. It just wasn't that popular. So it didn't take guys very long. You see some of those records back then and you're like,
Mm.
what? Like, how did they get here? But you got to think with his background and just his physique, his look,
Yeah.
that dude was going to be getting calls. It wasn't going to take long.
No. No.
Um, but unfortunately, what comes with that, Dominic, is, if he became a more well-rounded mixed martial artist, maybe he could have made a longer title reign. Maybe he could have
Yes.
remained relevant
Yeah.
in terms of MMA and in that heavyweight scene longer. But realistically, we're not talking about training MMA like how guys train today. I mean, we have to be realistic to the time period.
Yeah.
There wasn't a lot of MMA gyms. Like a lot of guys had their style.
Yes.
Like usually you were very skilled in one area and sure, you would train other areas to try to flesh out that game, but usually you had still that kind of mentality of UFC one, where it was like the jiu-jitsu fighter versus the boxer. Like that was still in it to a more well-rounded degree, which you were getting up
Yes.
until what, 10, 12, 13 years ago.
Yeah.
So for Brock, even if he started training, I don't think he would be as serious about training I mean, he'd be more serious about it. He'd be better with his hands or his jujitsu or whatever, but it wasn't gonna be what I think the question was intending it. I think a lot of when Ugur is asking this question, I think the intention is that in his mind, this is Brock Lesnar who just trained everything the way you think of guys training today. And I just don't
Yeah.
think that that's a realistic mindset to have in the
Yeah.
late 90s. So I think he would have been better UFC heavyweight champion, of course, but he wouldn't have made near the money he did
Yeah.
and would probably, I mean, he would be remembered fondly. You'd probably see him on the UFC, cameras in between fights. But, Dominic, that would be it. And I think the
Yeah.
way he went though was, whether we like it or not, probably the best path for him.
Yeah, dude. He left his mark on this sport. Love him or hate him. 9 total fights is all he ever had as a pro. What, 8 of them were in the UFC, right? So in that short amount of time, the things that he did, a lot of people will never even get close to. It's pretty crazy.
I'd like to see a guy like Shelton Benjamin and become an MMA fighter.
Shoo!
Talk about another hell of a wrestler,
Damn.
another hell of an athlete. I'm
Yeah.
just saying. I'm just saying. Or Kurt Angle. Kurt Angle said
Yeah.
he had kind of talked about potentially doing some MMA when I think it was when his WWE contract when he first left WWE. I think he
Mm,
had talked about it. That would have been interesting. But regardless, Dominic, we will move on to question number 3. Thank you, Uger, for sending those questions. Hopefully, I'm
yes.
pronouncing his first name right. I'm not sure. I apologize if I'm not. So, Dominic, this is a question. This is a topic that I have brought up on this show before. And this all kind of stemmed from Valentina as the long reigning women's flyweight champion, who one of the most dominant
Mm,
women's fighters of all time,
yeah.
lost her title via finish to Alexa Grasso. Huge upset, huge moment in Vegas. And it was pretty much a given she's going to get an immediate rematch. And I think most people don't even bat an eye at this. But I just have been sort of asking this question internally as well. So then I decided to bring it up.
Mm-hmm.
Our immediate title rematches for long reigning champions necessary? And honestly, I put that description in there of like a long reigning champion, because I think we would both be on the same page of, a guy wins the belt, like an Alex Pereira, right?
Yeah.
He lost his first title defense to Israel Adesanya, the man he beat for the belt.
Yeah.
Yes, of course, a lot of us wanted to see a trilogy to kind of complete that, but also it's like, would you say it was necessary for him to get an immediate rematch? No, because he didn't quite have the
Right.
accolades to back that up. So, long reigning champions, Dominic, is it necessary to give him an immediate rematch?
Um, so no, I don't think it's necessary. It doesn't need to happen. Like it shouldn't end and everybody be like, "Oh yeah, Valentina up next for sure. No ifs, no ands, no buts." It doesn't need to be like that. Are they deserving of that to be their next fight? 100%. If you've defended the belt 6, 7, 8 times like Valentina did, Demetrius Johnson, Izzy, Volkanovski, all these, that's a lot of long reigning champions in the past few years. We're lucky to see that. If you've gotten that, Amanda Nunes, another one, then yes, you do deserve it. But like, if you're not ready when the new champion is, and there's another contender, we don't need to hold them back for you to get another rematch. Just go chill out. We'll let, Taylor Santos, for example, go fight for the title again or whoever the case. And then Valentina, fine. Go fight for the title then. I'm not going to complain about it. And if you fight in the meantime and win, even more power to you, because then you are even more deserving already after being a long-standing champion. So while I don't think they're necessary, they are deserved. And I see why they happen frequently.
You see that word you're using there. You're saying not necessary but deserved. I feel like you're basically saying the same thing. Like to me, it's the same thing. You're saying they're not necessary, but they deserve to get them. So I mean, like, what's the difference there? To me, that's the same like concept. That basically, to me, if it were up to me, nobody gets an immediate rematch. Just
Ever.
never, ever,
Never.
because and maybe I shouldn't say ever, but to me, if you have a challenger waiting in the wings, someone who is a number one contender worthy guy,
Mhm.
immediate rematches, like when you lose your title, you are no longer the champion.
Mhm.
And I understand that there's this mentality, like what you're talking about, where it's like, oh, well, they deserve it for what they did. Dominic, look at this fight game. Look at what we've seen in the UFC, even just recently as recording, when you have this shit with Aljamain Sterling,
Mhm.
where Dana and the boys are throwing him under the bus and stuff. I mean, they're
Yeah.
really causing some shit. When had when has anybody in the fight game ever got anything they deserved?
Off of
So
merit.
now it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, like so now all of a sudden with immediate rematches, and I promise when I'm saying this, I'm not trying to like attack you. I'm just, I'm trying to get a little
No, I
into
get
it
it.
here.
I get it.
But I'm saying like now, but do they deserve it? It's like nobody, I think any person who comes into any combat sport, whether it be MMA, boxing, kickboxing, competitive jiu-jitsu, touch butt in the park, whatever, if you come in with the mentality of deserving anything, then you might as well just get out, just leave,
Mm.
because you're never going to be satisfied if that's the mentality you come in with. I think that in this game, Dominic, it moves fast.
Oh,
What
so
we
fast.
talk about last week, all of a sudden, is old news this week.
Oh
So
yeah.
with
Oh yeah.
you are, and we've seen it time and time again. You're only as good as your last fight.
Yeah.
A guy goes in there who's been champion a long time. Think of a guy like Anderson Silva.
You son of a bitch. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
I had to try to hurt you deep here.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
he loses to Chris Weidman in a fashion where a lot of people go, if Anderson had just,
Yeah.
not did that,
Yeah.
and not played with this food, maybe it goes different, right?
Yeah.
So then they do the immediate rematch. I know the leg thing. How could you? That's my point. If anybody gets immediate rematch, their legs are going to start falling off. No, I'm just kidding. But
Yeah.
um, that's the second point to this argument, Dominic, is that for a guy like Anderson Silva, when he just got finished by Chris Weidman, you're going to send him back in there without having seen any other look.
Yeah,
since Chris Weidman.
that's a
To
good point.
me, you look at the percentages of champions who lose their titles and get immediate rematches. Overwhelmingly, they do not get them back. And that's
Yeah.
why, again, I think it sets it up better. Valentina and Alexa Grasso, right? Alexa goes and fights someone like Aaron Blanchfield. Valentina goes and fights someone like Manon Fior. You set
Mm-hmm.
up two massive fights right there. Then guess
Mm-hmm.
what, Dominic? If they both win, then you do the rematch, and guess what? It's even bigger because they both went and got a win, and now they just met back, and their stock's bigger. They had two big fights in the meantime. That's just the problem. And this isn't just an MMA problem. UFC took this mentality from boxing. Boxing's always done. It's in the contracts, man.
Mm-hmm.
You
Rematch
have these,
clauses.
rematch clauses are rampant, and I hate it because I think it gets in the way of building even more big fights. Like there are situations where it just doesn't feel like the Izzy Pereira situation. I was in favor of doing that immediate trilogy because you looked around and it's like, well, who else are you going to give the title fight to? I mean, I'm all for like a Hamzat, but obviously with the news seeming to be that he might be going back to 170, it's like, who else were you going to give the title fight to? Robert Whitaker, Dricus du Plessis. I didn't feel like the Dricus fight was enough of an interest of mine to get in the way of what was already a really good story.
Sure.
So that's why I went that direction. Obviously, like what I'm saying about for Pereira, would it have helped him to go fight someone else and then come back? Yeah, probably. But that's the weighing of options you do here when you're trying to put together the biggest, best, baddest fight that you can do. So um, ultimately, I say, fuck your deserving, Dom.
No, you're a sly dog because when you were talking about setting up two massive fights rather instead, that made me sit up in my seat a little
Mm.
bit because
Yeah, yeah.
I'm all for lining things up real nice and
Right,
shiny,
right.
having a number one contender fight. Yeah, and look at that word deserving again. When I say, hey, you defended the belt 6 times, you're deserving to go try and get it again. Well, and this is a counterpoint to myself. If there's someone like an Aaron Blanchfield who's been tearing through the ranks to get to the top, isn't she deserving as
Right.
well? So,
Hasn't
and then at that,
she? Oh,
you know,
sorry. No, continue.
no, I
I'll
was
let
just
you
going to
finish
say,
your
like,
point.
isn't she deserving as well? So, in that point, wouldn't you almost prefer, when I say you speaking for the UFC and maybe from a fan perspective, but particularly the UFC, wouldn't you prefer to have her, as in Blanchfield, fighting for the title next someone new, a fresh face? It's a fresh feel with her and Alexa Grasso rather than running back the same type of fight. It's, yeah. And now go ahead because you were going to say something.
I think at the end of the day, I just don't like the word deserved. And that's why I
Mm,
think the word you're looking for there, Aaron Blanchfield has earned her title
earned.
shot. You
Yeah.
know, people like, and this isn't just you. I've heard this a lot where it's like Valentina deserves another chance at the title. It's it's a word that we almost throw out there when merit can't quite back us up anymore. Like,
Mm-hmm.
don't get me wrong, Valentina has done a lot in the past. But again, in this game, you're only as good as your last fight. It's the reason why nobody who doesn't currently hold a belt, if they lose their next fight, will get a title fight after that more than likely. I mean, God, we saw it with Jose Aldo before with Peter
Uh-huh.
Young, but an overwhelmingly percentage of time, you lose your fight, you go back in the totem pole. You don't move forward. You don't stay in the same place. It just doesn't work like that. But it seems like well, all of a sudden, when you're a champion, there's like
Mm-hmm.
this special privilege. No, I think the privilege is that you are the champion. There are a lot of benefits that come to that. You're top of the bill. You're getting paid more. Yeah, I know UFC, but you get paid more than most. And once you lose it, you have to fight your way back to get that again. I mean, it's
Yeah.
it's the climb. So
Mm.
that's why, to me, just the immediate rematches just feel like they conflict with the primal nature of fighting in of itself. Like I just don't think that that's when you think back to the almost animalistic roots of fighting, the
Yeah.
reason we do it, right? Not
Yes.
we, they do it. The
Yeah.
reason we talk about them
Yes.
doing it is, you know, getting knocked down, getting back up, like fighting for what's yours, like trying to earn your keep. And I just think that immediate rematch is a very deep answer here for something that maybe
No, I think
thinks
it's
that.
actually you're nailing it though.
Yeah, but I do think that the immediate rematches go against everything that the concept of fighting was built on.
And it and this is not as big of a point as all the stuff that you were just saying, but at the end of the day, it keeps the division going as well. We always talk about how we don't like seeing divisions held up. So why would I want to see an immediate rematch when another contender could fight and then Valentina fights Manon? I know we're just talking about Valentina, but that's the freshest one that comes to mind. Man, as much as I wanted to fight back there, you almost you're about to make me leave the episode saying fuck immediate title rematches too with you, Noah. Like,
Well,
man.
think of like an example where Juliana Pena pulls off a massive upset over Amanda Nunes, and I myself said on this show I thought it was a fluke win.
Yeah.
But how much better would it have been if Amanda goes and fights someone else? Juliana
Yeah.
defends her title against someone else, they win. Juliana feels more legit as a champion at that point. She's built the reign. When you go from her beating Nunes and it's like now you got to beat her a second time, even though you finished her in the first fight. Like I don't know, just
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
math ain't mathing.
Okay. I'm with you leaving this one. I'm with you.
Yeah,
I
nice,
really am.
nice. Question number 4. This is the question that Dominic had his eye on pre-recording. He said
Mm,
this is a toughie. I think was the
yeah.
words he used. We're talking about legacy here, Dominic. Legacy.
Mhm. Mhm.
In terms of legacy, which fighter has over time become underrated? Who do you think of when you think of, you've obviously been watching the sport not in a hardcore capacity, but you have been watching it longer than me, so you probably have a better gauge for some of these guys when they were at their peak or in their prime, what their perception was. And now you've been able to kind of, as you've gotten older, still been following the sport. You've seen some people probably fall off that at one time seemed like one of the biggest deals in sport. So I think your answer will be hold a lot of weight here.
I think you're going to be hard pressed, specifically in the UFC, to find. Obviously, there's going to be, well, maybe not plenty, but there's going to be some to choose from for sure. But I think if this one's not in your top 3 of options when you're listening or watching this episode and reading this question, you might need to go reevaluate. It's BJ Penn. 100%. That's the
Ooh, I
name.
did not think that was the way you were going. I swear I had an answer in my head. I'm like, Dominic's going to take this. No,
Mm,
okay. BJ Penn.
yeah.
Nice.
BJ Penn was an absolute dog. You see that term, got that dog in him. He coined that term way back 22 years ago, man. I mean, this is a young guy from Hawaii that came in by just he was so young and green, had hair at one point, by the way, for those that didn't know. And he was an absolute dog, dude. He was beating the best fighters in the world for a very long time. You look at these win streaks that he had, and then you look at some of the names that he was beating. The Matt Hughes, Takanori Gomi, Matt Serra's. He fought Jens Pulver, Dean Thomas. You go up even further, Kenny Florian, Diego Sanchez. He's an OG multiple weight class world champion. And I think people forget about that because they see an older, I say this in a not to be disrespectful, but like the washed up quote unquote type of term. They see that over the past 10 years, essentially, someone who's lost 7 fights in a row, dating to their retirement fight in 2019. And they're like, BJ Penn, I mean, what's his record? 16-14. This guy used to be something. He used to be the man. He was more than just something in the UFC.
No.
And I remember being a kid and seeing him fight sometimes. And when he would, that fight where he licked the blood off of the gloves, I'm like, you don't want to mess with this dude, man. So BJ Penn, 100% popped into my head instantaneously when I read this question the last time.
Wow. No, I love that answer. I think that answer is perfect for what this question is trying to ask us. And you're so right about him too, because obviously, again, the BJ Penn I've got to see live is unfortunately a bygone era.
Mm,
It's a guy that's washed up who better days were miles behind him.
Mm-hmm.
And Dominic, I think that actually is something maybe you didn't quite touch on there that could add to your argument. The losing streak that he left the company on.
Mm.
I'm pretty sure he left when it was all said and done for his UFC career, he ended with more losses than wins.
Mm.
And I mean, I think that adds to your argument that
Yeah.
when you're talking about a
Yeah.
legacy, because that one time BJ Penn, you'll see him pop up on people who were there, people who were really watching at that time. You'll see him pop up on top 10, top 15 list.
Mm-hmm.
It always kind of catches me off guard. I'm always like, whoa, like someone else kind of recognizes the greatness that was BJ Penn.
Yeah.
And I just think that at his best, I don't think there's 10 fighters who were skill for skill, pound for pound better. Like I think
Yeah.
he's one of the top 10 pound for pound fighters in terms of talent of all time.
Yeah.
And he's also, I believe, he's either the first or second guy in UFC history to end up with 2 division titles. He didn't hold them simultaneously,
But at
but
that
him
time.
and Randy Couture, I think Randy might have done it first, but quite a feat in of itself. And he was at the lowest of weight classes you could be
Mm-hmm.
in the UFC, so he really carried those lower weight classes. I look back on that fight he had with like Diego Sanchez, where he just put on a clinic for 5 rounds. Diego, a guy who had a name for being that original Ultimate Fighter winner, and maybe a guy that a lot of people thought could become a champion, and BJ just beat the brakes off him for
Mm-hmm.
5 rounds. So great answer, Dominic. You stumped me there. I'm going to be honest. I thought for sure, and I want to make sure this isn't going to be my answer before I say it, because I had my answer and then it's kind of escaped me. Um, you know what, man? I'll go with the answer that I thought you were gonna say. And this one hits a little close to home, if you will. How about Rich
Oh,
Franklin? Rich
that's great
Franklin.
too. Yeah.
Uh, I think your answer is probably a little better for this question, but Rich Franklin does still hold a prominent position for an MMA promotion. He's, of course, very high up on the one totem pole. But in
Yes.
terms of his legacy as a fighter, Dominic, you're the one that always reminds me of before Anderson Silva came into the picture. Rich Franklin was viewed as the number one fighter in the world
Yeah.
when guys like Fedor were at their best. Rich Franklin was that guy in the middleweight division.
Yeah.
And I think even more for his impact, Dominic, that gets glossed over now is what he, as one of the faces of the company, was able to do during that bubbling time when the tough boom was on the horizon. This is a guy who was a teacher. He was clean cut, good looking guy, well spoken, articulate, very smart,
Yeah.
college educated. And he also was a complete badass who could kill you with one punch.
Yeah.
There was a stigma, there was an image that you thought of when you thought of a cage fighter at this time, and Rich Franklin did not fit it in any way.
Yeah.
But that was to the UFC's benefit. They were able to put Rich front and center, have him promoting the shit out of the company, out of his fights. And Dominic, I think it helped in some ways. Obviously I know the big story with the tough finale, but the funny thing is, Dominic, who the actual main event of the tough one finale was?
Was it Rich?
Rich Franklin, Ken Shamrock was the
Ken
finale of
Shamrock.
tough one.
Mm.
And obviously, I know why people tuned in, the story, Forrest Griffin, Stephen Bonner. But I'm just saying he was there. And
Yeah.
also, I believe that image, that face that he was able to be put in front of a lot of people, I think it probably softened a lot of people's negative mindset to MMA
Yeah.
at that time.
Yeah. That's a good one. I really do. And honestly though, like it's probably like in a way you said how BJ's maybe fits this question better. And I guess I would agree, but if you really do look, a lot of people just know BJ more in general. So when you look at it from that perspective, some people listening right now may not even know like who Rich Franklin is, or like maybe they just know, well, this is the guy that Anderson came in and destroyed to become the champion, and make his reign of dominance become a thing. But if you really do dig in here, Rich was quite incredible. I mean, I'm looking at his reign that he was putting together before that first Anderson fight, and even he won 2 fights in between the Anderson loss before he even fought him again. So that goes back to Noah's question, the previous question we talked about. So that's a really good option. I actually wasn't thinking of you picking Rich either. So we both surprised each other there, and I think those are 2 phenomenal options. I really do.
Question number 5. Talk about legacy.
Yeah, also fits.
There ain't nothing, at least at one time, Dominic, there was nothing that could be topped in terms of building a legacy for yourself in the UFC than to become a 2 division champion, simultaneously hold 2 division titles. It's been done a handful of times. Started, of course, with Conor McGregor, UFC 205. And then you had Daniel Cormier, you had Amanda Nunes, you had Henry Cejudo.
So we're talking
And,
simultaneous in particular
well,
here.
I mean, how many more are? I mean, I know there's a
Well, we
couple
just
more.
talked about like Randy and BJ, and I was just making
Well,
sure
I mean, no, yeah, they can be
they fit.
included, but I'm I'm
Okay.
I'm talking. But the question still stands: are 2 division champions still a big deal today? So, like, really, the impact of the 2 division champion is the what you've been seeing. I mean, really, when you think of this question, Dominic, we're not talking about guys who let's look at like Alex Pereira. If Alex Pereira beats Jan Blachowicz and then fights for the light heavyweight title and wins, that's not really the spirit of the question because of course
Okay.
that's a pretty big deal. To me, it's to get this idea of holding 2 division titles, but more than likely not competing outside of the title fight in one of those divisions. You get what I'm saying?
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. Are they still a big deal? Um, I think that they are pushed to still be a pretty big deal, but in terms of like my interest, I don't like when Connor did the 2 belts
Mm.
at New York. It was like, wow, this is pretty unbelievable, right? And
Yeah, it
then
was first
we
time.
that it started like a trend of like now all these champions go up, go down, go fight more champions. Can you hold 2 belts at the same time? Get a really cool picture. Like we were really we had a run where that was like the theme of the UFC or these dominant champions, and we're kind of out of that now a little bit. So I don't think it's as big of a deal, and maybe it was that would have been. I was gonna say maybe it was a little bit overplayed from the get go. I don't know if I necessarily would agree because I think it's really cool moment, but yeah, this is kind of stumping me. My brain's kind of bouncing all over the place. But I would go all in all. It's important, but it's not gonna like make or break me in my interest in who these champions are fighting, if they're fighting each other or not.
Feel like you tiptoed around the question there. I feel like you
Yeah,
didn't quite answer it. But I think what you're saying is that they are important, but not a big deal. Is that what you're saying? Like, or not as big of a deal as they used to be.
that's my main one. Yeah, they're not as
Okay.
important as they used to be,
Um, there may
or
be
as a big
something to
deal.
that. I mean, it's definitely not as big as when Connor did it because Connor was the first one. That's something that I'm trying to put in perspective. That like Connor was the first simultaneous 2 division champion. So, and of course, factor in that it was the first event in New York in over
Mm-hmm.
what 20 years or something, something like that. You know, pretty massive deal all around that event was. And then when DC did it, it was a big deal. When Amanda Nunes did it, it felt pretty big just because of who she beat to get the second one. And then when Henry did it, it was like, okay, cool.
That's dude.
And
I was just thinking the same thing. I was going through each one of them. Yeah.
like they felt big, but like I don't know, did it feel all that much bigger than if Henry had just defended the flyweight belt against whoever at the time? I mean, maybe it did. Yeah, it did, but I'll give you some examples. Like Volkanovski went for 2 titles, Dominic, when he fought Makachev. Do I feel like that storyline of Volkanovski going for 2 belts boosted the profitability of that card? Not really. To
Yeah.
be honest, Dominic, I think if Volkanovski, and the reason why I say this, because don't get me wrong, the card was big, that fight was big, even though the UFC for some reason were not promoting it like it was. But once the fight came around, once it was go time, everybody was
It was big.
captivated.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think some people will confuse that as like, well, it was big because it was champion versus champion. No, if
Uh-huh.
Volkanovski had relinquished the featherweight title and moved up, I think that fight's just as big
Yeah.
because we
Yeah.
know how good Volkanovski is all time. And this would still be his pursuit for a second weight class title. I don't think the simultaneous thing, I don't, if anything, I think it cheapens it compared to the guys who fought and earned their way to title fights in two divisions, at least somewhat.
Mm.
It's still big deals, and I'm not trying to say that these guys like took an easy way out. I mean, they took the fights that they were given. It's not a knock on anybody who's done the simultaneous thing, but I'm more impressed when a guy fights for one division, builds a run, maybe defends once or twice, and then he goes, I'm gonna, this weight cut's a little too hard. I'm gonna go up, and then he fights once or twice, gets a title fight, wins, and then again, just same story in a second division. Like I think that's an awesome way to go about it. I value that much more than, yes, it's still great if you can prove that you beat the best fighter in two different weight classes at a time. That still says something. But anybody can have an off night. Anybody, it takes greater. There's a greater impact on making a reign than just being the best guy on a single given night. I prefer a guy who proves they're the man for years.
Yeah. Okay. I want to go off of that because that now I feel like I can provide my answer at the beginning was kind of really jumbled and shitty. I'm going to listen back and probably hate that. But off of those points, I think first off, in terms of the big deal, the sellability of a fight, it's not as big of a deal now, champion versus champion. It's obviously a big deal if someone can become a simultaneous double champ for their legacy. It's huge. But what Noah just said, being able to build a reign and defend the belt is huge. We love that. We just talked about Valentina and all the title defenses she had. So for me, it would be a much bigger deal. And we've talked about this a little bit in the past, and the problem is it's so just hard to do this. If a champion of, let's just use Volk, just because he's fresh of the question. He is long standing at featherweight, is the champion. He goes up and let's say he would have beat Islam. He's got 2 belts. To me, it's a big deal if he can somehow, and it's going to hold up the divisions. I realize this, but if he defends featherweight, defends lightweight, defends featherweight, defends lightweight, that is like, and we've seen it be defended once a piece, here and there. Amanda's done both. Henry did both technically, but to continuously do it, that's when it would be, I would say it is a much bigger deal to me. But the fact of the matter is, we're just not going to be able to see that. It's not sustainable because of the divisions being held up.
Yeah.
And, if you fight here and then you're going to be fighting 10 to 12 months later at 145 again if you're Volk. So that's the problem why it's not as big of a deal to me.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I agree, but also I wanted to disagree with you, but I guess I can't disagree with you saying that it would be bigger if they did that. I just think that that'll never happen.
Yeah,
You
which
just
is a
can't do
shame.
it.
Yeah.
It just can't be done. I mean, yeah, you brought up the example, but like when Henry fought, like he had already defended the flyweight belt before he got the second belt. With
Yeah.
DC, well, Amanda, there's the caveat of there's just not much of a weight class. Really,
Yeah.
either one of hers, they feel like she's kind of cleaned out bantamweight,
Yeah.
and then featherweight is, not really a
Not real.
division.
Yeah.
So DC's a pretty good example, I guess, because he defended the well, I guess he didn't defend the light. He did defend the heavyweight belt against Derek Lewis, but
But he was done with 205. Yeah.
yeah. So I don't know. I guess there's really not a perfect example because Connor never defended either belt,
Never.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I guess that's the thing. I can't disagree with what you're saying. To me, it's like I, I can't even in my head go, oh, that would be a massive deal because it's like I scoff at the idea. I'm
Yeah,
just
because
like
it'll
that.
just
It
never
could just
happen.
never happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Usually one guy, when they go up for that second title, it's because they're planning to leave the division that
Yes.
they're in. That's
I mean,
what
look at
seems to
Aljo.
happen.
He's literally already
Yeah.
talking about it too. So
You
yeah.
got Islam talking about fighting Leon Edwards
Yeah.
there for a minute. Like, I think they all kind of want to do it and use that as a way to kind of go
Yes.
up a weight class, not have to cut as much weight, all that.
Yeah, for sure.
Number 6, Dominic. This is the question that was giving me a little fits, the little heebie-jeebies in the pre-recording part of the show. This is a stat that I brought up, and it sort of changed my entire way of thinking about fights in a lot of ways, Dominic. And this is about fighters 35 years and old, 35 years old and up,
Mm-hmm.
between the divisions of welterweight to flyweight. They are a combined 2-29 in UFC title fights.
There's that stat.
That 29. Henry Cejudo just lost to Aljamain Sterling. Aljamain Sterling 34, by the way. So with that, 2-29 is the record. Your only 2 victories. Shout out T. Wood, Tyron Woodley.
Mm-hmm.
One of those, though, being against 40-plus-year-old Damian Maia. So it was like someone had said that O had to go one way or another. But this question, Dominic, which current fighter has the best chance at being champion under those parameters? So we're looking at welterweight and under, a guy who you could see at 35 years old and up being a champion who is, and I threw the caveat in there, it's not currently a UFC champion. So who do you feel like you look at where they sit now? Maybe they're a couple years away, or maybe they already are at that age, and you're like, yeah, I think they could keep fighting at this level or will be fighting at this level when the time comes.
Oh man, this is tough because you have to like look through these divisions and think about who's younger, who's older. 35 years old and up at welterweight and below. Man, there's only so many names. Oh gosh, Noah, it's hard for me to pinpoint a name. Let's look at welterweight. I mean, this isn't even really a good example because he just lost. But like, if this question had come up, oops, sorry, I forgot to put the question on the screen. My apologies. If this question would have came up a few weeks ago, before Gilbert Burns fought Bilal, I would have gave you Gilbert as the answer. That would have that would have been the easiest one. But now that we've seen that, I don't look at any names in that division that are of this 35 years and older that could do it. So then I go to lightweight. This is the oldest division in terms of people that are up there at the top, but are they going to really get there and become the champion? Is Justin Gaethje, Benny Dariush? Benny could. How old's Benny Dariush? Hold on a minute.
33 or 34.
Shit. So even the people that I want to say don't meet the criteria.
Wait, what? No. They can be under 35. You have to project them to be fighting at that.
Oh.
That's what I said, Dominic. Come on,
I
follow my
didn't.
lead here.
I was too
So
busy trying to find names.
it
Okay.
could be anybody. Like, it can be someone under the age of 35. You just have to be like, in your mind, based off the fight years and how they've looked, project them to be fighting at that level. Like for Benny, I think he's 34. If you think a year from now, he's for one able to beat Islam and then hold that title for the next year. And he'd have to beat Charles. So I mean, there's a lot of ifs in there. But if you think that could be done, then that's your answer.
Okay. I'm gonna go with 2 just because I rambled for a long time. So let me get 2 names. Now I'll just do Benny Dariush. Benil Dariush. He's long overdue to get a title shot. I think he can beat Charles. Islam's a tough son of a bitch, but maybe he could beat him if Islam goes up to 170. Then Benny could definitely beat a lot of these other guys. I'll go Benil Dariush.
You son of a bitch.
This is a very hard question.
Yeah, that was exactly going to be my answer too. I'm
God, it would have been Gilbert if he didn't just lose.
I'm struggling a bit now. Benil Dariush would definitely be my answer. I feel like lightweight has the most guys who could probably fit that description, which is weird because Islam Makhachev feels like a guy who could be a very dominant champion.
Yeah.
I guess for Islam, is it weird, Dominic, that as good as he is, it's still like is it a given that this guy's going to be like a head and shoulders above his competition? Because to me, I feel like a lot of these fights would be competitive.
Yeah, that's a good
Like I know
point.
the Charles fight wasn't, but then Volkanovski, and I know Volkanovski, all-time great fighter, came up 10 pounds and gave him a hell of a fight. I think a fight with a guy, Beneil Dariush, I think Beneil could make that a
I
fight.
think Beneil would be the hardest fight for him.
You know, do I think it's the most likely scenario? I mean, maybe not. Maybe I do foresee. I don't know. When that time comes, I'll probably have a better idea. We'll see how Beneil looks against Charles.
Yeah.
I'm stalling because I'm gonna have to
No,
give
I
an
did plenty.
answer.
Don't
And
worry.
um, God, Dominic, you really stumped me here.
I have two other ones in my head. If you want me to just throw names,
Not yet. I mean, you know what? Call me crazy, but how about I say Henry Cejudo?
that was one of them. Yeah. No, I
So
wouldn't at
I'm
all.
just kind of looking. To be honest, it might not be the best answer, just because Henry, like, I don't know, like how realistic is it for him to want to get back to a title fight? Um, like how many more times is he actually going to fight? But considering where things stand right now with Aljo, if Sean O'Malley beats Aljo, or if Aljo decides that he's too injured to fight, all of a sudden Cejudo's in that spot, and he might beat Sean O'Malley, and then he's a champion again. Yeah, I guess I'm kind of cheating by taking the interim route, but
Mm,
even if Sean O'Malley wins, Dominic, you got to think they'll probably try to do the Marab fight, but Henry would probably, with one win, be able to put himself back in there. Um, Marab's a decent choice actually as well. He's 32.
mm.
I think he's got the kind of style that you could see him, even at bantamweight, 135 pounds, be a just dangerous and dominant fighter for 4 or
A
5
long
more years.
time. Yeah, that's a good point.
But
You know,
it more than likely, when it's going to be a long time probably before you see someone at one of these lowest weight classes. As much as these guys seem like realistic possibilities, there's a reason that the only two in that 2-29 record is that welterweight, which is literally the highest. Like if you go lightweight and below, it's never happened.
that's crazy.
So
That's crazy, man.
lightweight feels like the next division, which would make sense. It's the next one down, but there's a lot of guys in there who feel like they could if circumstances are right.
Yeah. Because, I mean, technically, you know, like Kamaru could become the champion again.
I don't
Colby
know, man.
Covington would be a great option, I
No,
think.
Colby's got probably the best shot out of everybody we've mentioned because he's likely fighting Leon Edwards next.
Yeah.
And he might be the favorite for FI. Actually, I think he was the betting favorite as of now, but obviously that fight's not been made official yet. So, yeah, actually, Dominic, I think you just found the best one there.
And
A
he's
lot of people won't
35
like
right
that,
now.
but that's not the point's not that if we think he'll win or not. It's he's actually booked for a title fight
Yeah.
at the age of 35. So yeah,
Yeah.
no, and he's technically I think a betting favorite. So
Mm.
that's interesting.
We found our way around that one.
Yeah. Question number 7, Dominic. This is something you've brought up a few times, especially early on in this podcast when we first started watching Bellator more often. We've seen Bellator have success with taking very young, inexperienced fighters and building them up in their promotion to become championship level.
Mm-hmm.
AJ McKee, there's a ton of people I'm forgetting off the top of my head, but AJ McKee was the one that jumped out to me. These guys that come in like with no professional
Yeah.
bouts at all,
Yeah.
and they just spend years just building and molding them and letting them kind of work their way up through the promotion. Is this something, because I know you've talked about how much you like that idea of like
Mm.
kind of building your own talent.
Yeah.
Is this something that can successfully become replicated in the UFC?
Yeah. I don't. I mean, I think it could like be a successful thing. It's not a thing that the UFC would do. Like the closest thing to this the UFC does is the Contender Series, and like a Bo Nickel, right? What did he have? 1 or 2 pro fights before he was on the Contender, but then they made him fight on the Contender twice. So at that point, he was 4 fights in before he was in the UFC technically. So I think it would be cool. I think it could be successful, but the UFC has like kind of found their place. I don't think, and this is going to sound, a little bit rude. I don't think the UFC wants to waste their time going after these super duper young, very green fighters that haven't really proved anything just yet. They'd rather see them in the regional scene. That's why they have all of these like talent scouts that work for them that go out and see these people, LFA, Cage Fury, so on and so forth. And then they're like, okay, we might be onto something here. Let's pull them to the contender and have them fight. I'd
Do they
like to.
actually have talent scouts? I thought it was just the two matchmakers in Dana. I think
Yeah,
those
I
are the
mean,
only three.
yeah, that works though, right? They fit the mold. That's what they do. And
Yeah,
so, man, that'd be a cool job to have, actually. Anyways,
I know.
UFC, if you're looking for any more scouts. But yeah, it. I wanted to say it would be cool, but I'm not like chomping at the bit for it because I think it's something that Bellator has done a pretty good job in. Isn't even your boy Pico? I think all of his fights have been in
Yeah,
Bellator
yeah.
too. So I think it's something cool that they do. They found their spot with that. The PFL doesn't really do it. The UFC doesn't do it. One doesn't. Well, one does it some, I guess, with some of the fighters I've seen. But yeah, I think it's a Bellator thing for the most part. So yeah, I'm gonna say no.
Yeah, I wanted to spit on this idea when I saw it. Like I hate this idea. I hate it so much. I love that Bellator does it.
Yeah,
Don't get me wrong. But Dominic, the UFC are the biggest promotion by far in the world. Why would they do this? Why would they do this? Because when you tune into a UFC event, you are supposed to be hit with a certain type of quality. Dare I
yeah.
say, a quality that really they've not been upholding for some of their events over the last
Mm.
few years. You look at like the contender series, which yes, we love, but at the same time, Dominic, I mean, it kind of is just a nicely produced regional show.
Regional show. Yeah.
And then you look at some of these fight nights, and they're maybe a step above that because you get like one or two fights that feel UFC caliber, but not much more than that. I would hate this because it would turn into a point where it's like, okay, the UFC really isn't where the best fighters in the world are. Like it's just where the most fighters in the world are. So yeah, a lot of them are really good, but you mix that where if they brought in like all these 0-0 guys to like duke it out and kind of throw a bunch of shit at the wall and see what sticks. Meanwhile, you got guys like Francis Ngannou, who's your sitting heavyweight champion, leaving, and you got different promotions like Demetrius Johnson in one, Yaroslav Amosov in Bellator, Johnny Eblin in Bellator, and you kind of go, wait a minute, did the UFC actually have the best fighters in the world, or do they just tell us that they do? Shout out to Robin Black. He's kind of brought up that point himself,
Mm.
where it's like maybe they don't actually have like all the best fighters in the world. Like maybe they have a vast majority of them, but maybe that's just what we've been told, so we just kind of eat it up. And I think that would just showcase that more. And this is just leads into a whole nother problem I have where I really think this could be an easy solution. The way the UFC do their cards currently, where you have pay per view events that are supposed to be the big cards worth the money, right? Title fights,
Mhm.
all that. Then you have fight nights, which
Mhm.
right now it feels like you kind of flip a coin if you're going to get like a good fight night or a fight night that's
Yeah.
kind of like skippable.
Yeah.
Why don't they do like a third tier? Take
Mm.
those skippable fight nights and why
Mm.
don't you combine them with like contender series? Why don't you have contender series bouts like mixed in with signed UFC fighter bouts and just kind of
Oh.
make contender series like its own version of a fight night? So it's like you come in, maybe your main event is still a big fight, maybe it isn't. Maybe your main event would be a fight like Anthony Hernandez taking on
Edmund.
Edmund Shabazian. And then, you come in like a lot of people probably wouldn't. You probably would still get more people to watch that than watch Contender Series. And I
Yeah.
feel like Contender Series does pretty well. And then you step up, fight nights should be mostly established UFC guys. And then your pay per view should be your biggest and best fights that you can put on each month. So to me, I feel like the UFC just need to implement a third tier of events. And that way you wouldn't have as many people getting mad about the fight nights.
And not to that extent, but with some of the Ultimate Fighter finale cards, right? They'll have
Yeah,
a main event,
yeah,
a couple Ultimate Fighter fights, the finales, maybe a couple of the other ones from the house fighting, and then a couple other newer or less established UFC fighters to fill out the card. Something like that, but more prominently
right.
in the schedule, more frequently. That would be cool. I
Like
definitely
I
think that'd
like
be
I don't
cool.
see why Contender Series needs to be just the few weeks of the fall that it is. Like,
I
don't
wish
get
it
me
was much
wrong.
more.
Well, like, why can't they just do less of them and spread them out, or not do less of them, but just spread them out?
Right. Yeah.
Like, if you want to do 10 a year, that's fine, but just do them throughout the year. Like, regional MMA doesn't just stop. Regional MMA is not seasonal.
Right. So
So
why do
why
they
are
do it?
they're
Yeah.
holding out guys for till the fall because that's when they want to do the Contender Series? Like, just do some fight night cards, some Contender Series cards, or tough finales style
Hmm.
type thing. But I mean tough finale, like not the last couple tough finales, like when they actually did tough finales. Now the
Yeah.
tough finales just get thrown in with fight nights, which
Yeah. Yeah.
maybe that is what I'm talking about. But I think there's just like a third tier of event that would stop a lot of the complaining you see each week about the quality that we're getting.
I like that idea a lot, and it's just more fights, I guess, at the end of the day to watch as well.
I mean, I don't know how much more it would be, but it would just give us a clear idea, like
What's what?
You like some of these fight night events, Dominic, that we preview and recap on the show, it's kind of like we're really stretching it out to make this an episode. Like it's
Hmm.
like we talk about the main event, and even the main event itself doesn't feel all that compelling, and that's it.
Yeah.
So if you had that third tier, we may touch on it in a recap, but we probably wouldn't preview them because
Right.
that's what we did with Contender Series. So it would just help us kind of gauge like, and it would help expectations as well. Like a lot
Yes.
of people come here because they know every fight night and every pay-per-view we're going to recap and preview. But if you did that third tier, it would just help like setting the both expectations. Like we're not going to be probably touching those real small cards outside of talking about them on recaps, and then the viewers don't expect it either.
Right. I like that. That's interesting.
So I kind of turned that question into something it wasn't, but I
You
really
turned it
wanted to
into an idea.
I wanted to talk about that, so I
Yeah.
figured I'd just use it then. Final question, Dominic, number 8. These are your last 4 main event losers that we're talking about here.
Oh yeah, they are, ain't they?
Yeah, so we're talking about Ciryl Gane, Kamaru Usman, Alex Pereira, and Henry Cejudo. And what I love about this, Dominic, is all 4 almost feel like they're in somewhat similar situations, yet come from completely different backgrounds in MMA, and are in different places in their career, have accomplished vastly different things, but they all kind of feel like they have similar, at least the similar amount of questions. So of those 4 fighters that I just mentioned, all 4 of them coming off a loss, who is more likely to bounce back in your opinion? Like who of these 4, and when I say that, who of these 4 feel like you are most confident in your head that they can get right back on track and perhaps make another run at a title or whatever? Like who's the person that you would put your life behind to become champion again or for the first time, whatever?
Alex Pereira at light heavyweight, 100%.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a shocking one to me. I'm going to be honest with you.
I think. I mean, look, he's fighting Jan, right? Jan Blachowicz is his
Yeah.
light heavyweight debut. I'm not saying it's an easy fight, but it's definitely a winnable fight for someone as dangerous as Alex. He's going to be at 205. This is a big motherfucker. Somehow he was making 185. I don't know how he did it for as long as he did. Now he's going to be so strong, dude. And he's only going to continue getting better, I think. Even though he lost to Izzy, I think there's still skill sets to be unlocked for him. I don't know how much more, but there are things I still think that are there. And I think the state of light heavyweight, it's not one of the best divisions of all the men's divisions. I think if he beats Jan Blachowicz, he's right there, ready to step right in for a title shot. And I think that he can beat a Jamal Hill. I think he can beat a Yuri. I think he can beat a Rakic. I think he could beat a Magomed Ankalaev. I'm going Alex Pereira, and I'm actually much more confident picking him over the other three, and I'm surprising myself with that. But yeah, I'm going with Alex.
The more I looked at it, I was like, "Who am I picking for this one?" Because I was shocked when you said it, and then I went, "Well, yeah." Kind of look at the other options. I think I'm going to go Henry Cejudo, Dominic, and
Mm,
again, it's
back
it's a
to
tough
Henry.
one, a tough
Yeah,
one. So let's go down the line, right? Ciryl Gane, man, what a fall from grace it's been for
that
us with
hurts.
Ciryl Gane.
Yeah,
Dominic, we said on this show on multiple occasions, this man is the future, the present, everything, the most well-rounded UFC heavyweight in history. It's kind of like when you see those clips of Joe Rogan talking about Ronda Rousey. That's what I feel like when I hear back us talking about Ciryl Gane. Could he come back and still have a good run? I mean, I believe he's still one of the better heavyweights in the world. It's just, you know, he's just got some glaring holes in his game that we did not see on his
yeah,
way up. Kamaru Usman, the age is the big factor, right? He's lost two in a row after looking so dominant for so long. Age, and then the fact that you kind of think of he probably is fighting Hamzat next, which I
yeah,
don't necessarily love for him. Um, that age is probably the biggest factor for me in kind of keeping him out, which is funny because I picked Cejudo. But then Alex Pereira, Dominic, I think inexperience plays a big factor here. Like, is he? It's such a weird matchup. The styles make fights, right?
mm,
Like, is he as great as he is? Is almost like the best matchup that Pereira can get in the UFC, like of an elite fighter, like of the
yeah,
elite. He doesn't, Izzy doesn't offer a lot of the things that Pereira would typically struggle most with.
right.
So at light heavyweight, it's not exactly a talent stack division for grapplers, so that definitely is to his benefit, I guess. But he's still so young in his MMA career, not age wise. That's another thing. He's like 36, ain't he?
I think so. Yeah, yeah,
Um, I think he could. I think right now I sort of favor him to beat Jan Blachowicz.
hmm
And then ultimately, I think if he wins that, he's probably fighting for a title. And we know Dominic, my call out of Izzy versus Jamal Hill by Halloween looks better and better each day.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So, would I favor Pereira to beat either of those two guys at light heavyweight? That's God, dude. Those are some great fights, but I don't
hmm
know. That's a tough one. I think I see what you're seeing now that I'm kind of talking through it. But I'm gonna say the age and overall lack of experience in MMA holds him back.
Yeah.
There's
All right.
some sort of stumble in there.
Right.
But Henry Cejudo is going to ultimately be my answer, and I don't feel super confident in any of these four, if I'm being honest with you. But I look at Aljo's likelihood of either walking away from the sport or moving up,
Yep.
and then I look at who's around Henry, and you have a lot. I mean, it's a crazy talented division,
Super.
but I think he holds up decently well on paper with some of these guys, like um, Corey Sandhagen, Sean O'Malley. They're not easy fights. He probably would be the underdog in a lot of them. But I do think that the well-rounded skill set he brings, the Olympic wrestling and the championship pedigree, I think Triple C could still. There's still a world where he gets that quadruple C next to his name.
Yeah. You think in that division, Marab would be the hardest challenge for him to get back to the
Ooh,
title?
yeah, yeah, that's probably the toughest one.
No, I'm
Maybe
just
I
saying
actually,
though.
you know
Like,
what? I'm changing my answer. Alex Pereira. You brought up Marab. I thought of Marab rocking the jacket. I thought of Marab snatching his gold chain. Not that stupid ass pillow shit that Dominic tried to
it's
bring up.
always the
But yeah.
pillows.
Well, who won that vote?
Okay,
You didn't even get a single vote.
this is true. Really? Well, I guess if you don't count me voting on our
Yeah,
own
you
poll.
you it does not count. So
Okay. Okay.
I mean, it just blew you away, Dominic. Actually, they tallied the numbers. I believe I got something like 500% more votes than you did.
That's probably accurate. Yeah.
Don't think too hard about that math, everyone listening, watching. But yeah, I'm changing my answer. Alex Pereira, Dominic, damn it, fucking talked me over the ledge. I think it comes down to the competition. I think for all four of these guys, like
Do you want to hear something crazy? Maybe
what's
it's not
that?
that crazy. I feel like Alex might just starch Jan Blachowicz.
If our buddy Tyler's watching right now,
Oh,
he's gonna
yeah,
be fuming.
dude.
How dare you disrespect the Polish power?
I know.
But I also might agree with you.
I don't.
Like I
Yeah,
think a
I
lot
don't
of
know what it is.
people are gonna think that he's gonna do what he did to Izzy.
The
But
Izzy. Yeah.
Pereira, did you see the picture of him next to Tyson Fury today?
Yeah. I'm telling you right now, either Alex ain't 6'4" or Tyson ain't 6'9", because they were
Well,
literally
I've
almost
seen
eye to eye.
Tyson in a boxing ring going up against Deontay Wilder, who's 6'7". Tyson Fury is every bit of 6'9".
Well,
And I've been
Pereira is.
wondering, that's 6'4". When Pereira stands in the octagon, I'd be
No.
going, because I'm 6'4". And I
Yeah.
look at him and I go, I wouldn't be that fucking tall in the octagon.
Yeah.
I'm like, that
Those like
guy's
I'd be like
massive.
this a little bit, just a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I definitely think Alex Pereira is taller than that. Or maybe he was wearing lips.
Little tippy toe action, maybe. Yeah. Okay.
But what a bold move to do as a man who's already 6'4". Like, come on.
Yeah.
Just be
He's
grateful for something.
Yeah. Short kings are pissed right now hearing this.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. But yeah, Dominic, anything else on that one? Anything else about anything else about anything else?
Anything else about anything else about anything else? I don't think so. I think we had some good ones in here today. I think I stumbled a little bit on a couple, but hopefully I brought myself back
I know
on those. And
you're your toughest critic. You're being too hard on
yeah,
yourself. I mean, it's just the fun of. I
some
mean,
of
we'll
these are
admit.
hard to answer,
We'll
huh?
admit, Dominic. I mean, Dominic, you've always taken this approach with these, where you kind of like to be surprised and
Yeah,
sort of think on your feet.
yeah,
But in general, we both are kind of doing that today because we were sort of planning to do
true.
a cage side rewind.
Hmm.
But due to the fact that we're recording this on a weekday, I work tomorrow. Like, just it's a
They
long
take a
one too.
while.
It's a
Yeah,
long one. There's
yeah,
your hint. But um, because of that, we're pushing it off till we'll record it here soon. But
yeah, yeah.
um, so we both kind of came in a little bit more cold turkey, especially for me. I typically give myself time to think about these, but Dominic, you've always been like, I like to be
I do,
surprised, kind of
yeah.
think on my feet. So no, you're good. You're good. I mean, I called your ass out for a couple. And that's not even the two you're talking about. Like, we're good here, dude.
And you brought me to your side on one. I got you to pick
Yeah,
Alex on
yeah,
this
that's
one. I
true.
mean, there it is.
Yeah. See, that's the beauty of verbal sparring, people. It's not so much about us tearing each other down. It's about us building each other up. Dominic, with that, there's only one segment we could end the show on. That's a little segment we like to call closing statements. The segment where we build on everything, on everything, on anything, on anything, on anything. It's the point of the show where me and Dominic can talk about anything and everything, MMA related or not. So, Dominic, do you have any closing statements for today's show?
Yeah, I don't really have much for the sole reason that I want the people to know what you've had to go through this last week.
I
So
was afraid you were going to say that, Dominic, and let's see if I can remember all the horror
that's
I've
how
been
bad it
through.
was.
I've been trying to drown it out. I've been trying to just get it out of my brain. Okay, everybody. Let's start. I guess it starts with trying to record. Well, this episode we're doing here. We tried to record this. Was it a week ago now?
Something
Had
like
to have
that.
been. Yeah, it had to
Yeah.
have been about maybe a little over. I think it was on a Tuesday. So I'm gonna
Yeah.
say we're recording this on a Wednesday. It was probably just over a week ago. Me and Dominic get on record a cage side rewind. We're excited, even though it is a weekday, and I'm kind of like, this is gonna be long. This is gonna be. I'm basically just gonna go to bed after this. Like, sucks. But I love doing it though. I love the concept. I love watching old cards, so I'm kind of up for it.
Go check out the ones we have. By the way, shameless
Yeah.
plug.
Yep. So we get on, and one of the fun things, and this is why it's been a blessing in disguise, sorta, that this whole laptop issues came about. I had this laptop for 2 years, not the one that I'm on now, but my old one. And it just never was consistent, Dominic. We've just had a hell of a time. Like maybe for some of you, you haven't noticed, But if you watched long enough and hard enough, and especially if you watched on YouTube, you've probably seen little cuts here and there. Sometimes my face just disappearing because something with the audio and video editing, that process. And that's just been like a normal thing for the last 2 years. And Dominic, what these people don't understand is that when we've recorded, there's been times where I'm talking, I stop, and then it takes about 4 seconds for me to start hearing Dominic talk because we're that off.
Yeah.
Like, we're not in sync at all.
Yeah.
And I still think we've done a pretty good job of keeping it together and, putting together quality episodes. But it is a hindrance because right now, Dominic could jump in, and if he wanted to, and cut me off and say something, and we
Yes.
could just keep going naturally like we're together.
Yeah.
It's hard to do that when you know that the person you're talking to is about 4 seconds ahead of you.
Yeah.
So we go to record it, and it's not happening. Unbearable. Just the worst.
Some would say the
connection.
worst it had ever been. Yeah.
And meanwhile, I mean, I'm connected via Ethernet cord
Yeah.
directly into my laptop, like all this stuff, and it's just not happening. So I get frustrated. It starts. We're on here for like an hour and a half. We go, okay, we got to push this off. So we set another recording time. But at the same time, we kind of come to this conclusion of like, oh, wait a minute. We could record on my phone. Because when I get on my phone, we're talking like how we are now. Like it's very in sync. Problem is, I don't understand the science behind it, Dominic, but the audio, one, doesn't sound good. I understand that because it's phone. 2, you can hear yourself when you're talking. And also it gets picked up in the recording.
Yeah.
So it's almost like what would you call that?
An echo.
Echo. Yeah, an echo effect. So that's a problem.
Yep.
So then we're like, how could I plug in this beautiful microphone into my phone?
Yeah.
So Dominic decides to demand that I buy an adapter for my. I'm just kidding. Buy an adapter for my microphone to plug into my phone, which I happily obliged because I'm like, I don't want to let my buddy Dominic down.
Mm-hmm.
So then when we do it, I sound just as bad as I did before. And the bigger issue in this, Dominic, is I have Bluetooth earphones that I needed to put in my ears to hear you and also talk into the mic. For some reason, I wasn't allowed to do both. I had to either listen or talk through not these, but my earbuds, or I had to be able to talk through the mic, but then Dominic would have that same echo effect because he would be talking, he would hear himself through the phone. Yeah, you get it. So
yes.
So I changed every setting I could in my phone to make it work. It wasn't happening.
Yeah.
So I'm pissed because I'm like, well, I just wasted $30.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of wanting to wring Dom's little neck. No, I'm just kidding. Dominic, he just sent me the link. He did not push me to buy it. All right. But anyways, I get in my car the next morning. Phone connects via Bluetooth to the car speakers. So it shows that it's connected, but no sound playing.
Right.
Not a peep.
Nothing.
Turn the volume up. Still not a peep.
Silent library.
But then I turn it to the radio. Very loud.
Very loud.
Because I had it like all the way up.
Yeah.
Trying to test it. And then I'm like, what the fuck's happening? I turn on the radio. It was like fucking like jump back. So I'm like, what setting did I change that I wasn't supposed to that's causing this? Because I'm like, it's too close in time for this to be happening. My car's never done this.
Yeah.
Never been an issue. Now all of a sudden it's an issue.
Right.
Well, I try to change every setting I can think of back to the way it was for it to still just not work. So then I look up a way to reset the settings on my phone. So this wipes out my setting preferences. It wipes out like stuff like credit cards that are saved on your phone, passwords that are saved on your phone, and like my alarms. It's like I had to redo my alarms and stuff. That's the kind of stuff that it wipes out. But your apps, your pictures, all that stuff, it all stays. So I do it. Still doesn't work.
Mm.
So I'm like, wait a minute. So you're telling me it's not what I just did yesterday? This is just a new tech issue. Find out a way to reset the Bluetooth system in my car. Dominic works perfectly fine ever since.
Mm-hmm.
It's all right. We get through that one, right?
Of course.
So then, God, what even is next, Dom?
We recorded our
How
preview.
about no. You're getting a little ahead of yourself.
Oh, you're right. You're right.
Day before, so now we're at the weekend. I'm just trying to relax, chill. Fights are about to start. I'm like, let me check DraftKings real quick. Now I have my Face ID with my DraftKings account. So like anytime I get on there, I don't even have to type in anything, just face scan in. Well, face scan stuff also gets taken away by the settings refresh. So I get on there and I'm like, fuck, what's my password? I'm like, well, let me just, I'm sure I have it saved. Oh, wait. It deleted every goddamn password that was on there, Dominic.
Yeah.
So then I'm like, okay, let me try. I tried a couple, and then I'm like, shit. I'm like, I'm gonna get locked out. I'm like, this is not gonna be good. So I'm like, God, let me just do the forget password thing. So it says it sends a link to my email, and I go, oh boy. The email I signed up for DraftKings with is my college email, which I have not used since I graduated. But I'm still like, okay, I can get on it though. So I go to sign in and I'm like, okay, let me use my saved pass.
Do you guys see the trend?
Yeah, not there.
Yeah.
So then I try to forget password for the college email in order to get the link for the forget password on DraftKings. Do you guys see the fuckery happening there?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember from doing it's a duo sign on at college. Yeah, that's how it was our whole time there. And my phone's always been worked fine for when I've had to send my phone a text or a call, whatever. But I go to do it this time, Dominic. Nothing happens. So then I go to have it send me an email. Oh, wait a minute. Why would I ever use email for my forget password for the email that I'm trying to get into? Do you see how that's not making sense there?
Yeah.
So basically, I end up being locked out of DraftKings. I'm locked out of my Bowling Green account. So therefore, even though I had a pretty good day betting, not gonna lie, but no, I have no idea. I'm not able to see any of it.
Yeah.
And then Sunday we get on to record again, Dominic. I get on. I'm like, you know what? Today's gonna be a good day.
Fresh start.
And I go to press the power button. Nothing happens. Nothing.
Yeah.
Dead. Bam, boom, slam. Done.
Yeah.
Rest in peace.
Yeah.
Computer just bit the dust.
Gone.
Literally gone.
Yeah.
No sign of it outside of the fact that it was a fucking piece of shit.
Yeah.
That
No
never
warning.
worked.
Well,
Just
maybe we had a lot of warning, but
yeah. But it just died. So we had to record on my phone.
Yeah.
But everything's good now. Because we
Knock
got the
on wood.
Lenovo. Before you guys make fun, the Lenovo's the shit. It's all good so far. Hopefully it stays this way.
Yeah.
It's just been a really bad week, Dominic. So yeah, that's my rambling done about that.
And Noah, where does Kevin Lee fit into all this?
My name's Noah Baker. That's Dominic Slee. We are but just two of the below average Joes, and we'll see you guys on. I forget when this is coming now. Dominic, help me out. When's the next time we're gonna see him?
This is on Friday, so we see you guys next Friday.